in the tiger cages. Well, this young man very bravely sought me out along with Don Luce. Don Luce was a young man working, I think at that time, had been working for the World Council of Churches in Vietnam. If I'm not mistaken, I think he was a native of Vermont. I think, yes, Don Luce was a native of the state of Vermont. And he'd been over there teaching Vietnamese how to grow sweet potatoes, agricultural things. Well, Don Luce had known this young man. I had sought out Don Luce because Luce had written a book about Vietnam called Vietnam, the Unheard Voices. So in preparation for this trip to Vietnam, I read the book because I felt that congressmen should hear both sides. So I read this book. I'd never met Don Luce before, but I was intrigued by this book that there really was a large sector, I questioned at the time, of South Vietnamese who were opposed to the war. We were led to believe quite differently, of course. So Don Luce brought this young man to see me to tell me about the existence of the tiger cages. Now, Mr. President, these tiger cages had been rumored for a long time. In fact, the year before, in 1969, a young congressman by the name of John Conyers went over with a congressman, I believe it was Father Drinan, Bob Drinan, and they had inquired about the existence of the tiger cages. They were told this was communist propaganda. No such thing existed. Our military denied it. The Nixon administration denied it. The South Vietnamese government denied it. There was no such thing. This was just communist propaganda. Well, this young man who came to see me said that they're out there, because I was in them, but they told me if I talked, they'd kill my brother. So he said, I really have to place my trust in you, because someone has to expose them. And I said, well, I don't know if I could or not, because I'd have to get a couple of congressmen to go out there. It was on an island. You had to get a plane, fly out to this remote island. It would take a whole day. And then he told me, you won't find them unless you have a map. And I'll draw you a map. So he sat down and he drew me a map of how to find the tiger cage. He said, because you see there's a lot of prison camps on Con Son Island. There's about 5 different prison camps, and they all look the same. And unless you know what you're looking for, you'll never find the tiger cages, because they're in one prison camp. And you have to know how to find them. So he drew me a map. He couldn't quite remember exactly, but he knew that to look for these certain symbols, these certain signs, these certain things that he remembered. So I took the map. I then went to see Congressman Gus Hawkins of California and laid this out for him and said that there might be a possibility that we could find out for once and for all whether or not these tiger cages really existed. Well, he said he would go, but we needed another congressman, and William Anderson, Congressman William R. Anderson from Tennessee. When he heard the story, he said, I'll go. Keep in mind, Congressman William R. Anderson had until that time been a supporter of the Vietnam War. He wrote a book once, which is one of my favorite books. It was called Nautilus 90 North. This same Congressman Anderson was the first skipper of the first nuclear submarine called the Nautilus. He was a very famous guy at the time because he was the first one that took a nuclear sub underneath the North Pole. And he wrote a book about the Nautilus submarine called Nautilus 90 North. He retired from the Navy, was elected to the House from Tennessee. So Congressman Anderson, Congressman Hawkins, and I take off with Don Luce. We go out to the islands. I'm not going to give you the whole story, but armed with the map, we were able to find the tiger cages. And when we found them, we were told by one Red Walton, who was the USAID directorate, public safety director, that we had no business being there. Oh, I might say, before we got out there, Mr. President, this same Red Walton had told us that these prison camps were more like a Boy Scout camp. So they took us to some of the prison camps, and they weren't all that bad, for prisons, I guess. But again, armed with a map, we found the tiger cages. And the suffering that we saw there, the inhumanity that we saw there, was something that you just never shake. Well, I was armed with a camera. I had my camera, so I took pictures. And we fortunately had two congressmen, William Anderson and Gus Hawkins, there. And armed with that information and coming back to the States, we published the pictures, got the story out. It became a worldwide story. The prisoners were released because of the pressure that was put upon the South Vietnamese government. They then began to tell their stories. But there was one picture I took that was in Life magazine. It was of a young Buddhist monk who looked up through the bars of these tiger cages as we looked down on him. And he said in Vietnamese, and we had Don Luce as an interpreter, he said, "I am here for only one reason, because I speak out for peace. And no matter how long I stay here, I will continue to speak out for peace." I took a picture of that young Buddhist monk. Yet before the prisoners were all released, he was beaten to death. Well, I have since gone back to Con Son Island and visited his grave. The tiger cages are now a memorial, kind of like a museum for people to see, for all the horrors they inflicted on so many hundreds of people. People were shackled there together. Awful conditions. Awful conditions. This weekend, Mr. President, I was handed a paper done by Vaughn Bagley. I visited with her. She was doing a paper on the tiger cages of Con Son. And she wrote a paper about it and did some very, very good research. And Vaughn is just a high school student, but she did a lot of great research. And she went back and looked at all of the congressional hearings that were held on it. And she quoted Representative Hawkins this way. She said, Representative Hawkins stated at the congressional hearings in July of 1970, quote, "Con Son is a symbol of how some American officials will cooperate in corruption and torture because they too want to see the war continued and the government they put in power protected." Well, as she went on to point out that, she said, unfortunately, however, in their democratic crusade, America lost the very principles of freedom and equality that they purported to defend, and ultimately violated Article 13 of the Geneva Accords of 1949. A former prisoner testified to the clear violation of these principles, quote, "No matter what medical problem the prisoner has, TB, diphtheria, he is still thrown in with all the others who are not sick. All still eat out of the same bowl, sleep together, shackled to the same rope. I know of no other place on earth where human lives are so cheap as in Con Son." Hawkins argued, Congressman Hawkins argued, quote, "Con Son is the type of not looking at our own faults and atrocities that endangers our American prisoners of war held by the communists." Well, Vaughn Bagley did a great job on her research. And what she pointed out in her paper was that in our pursuit of democratic ideals and democracy around